When I won the lottery, my parents wanted to take it away to fund their golden child's future, ruining mine in the process. When I refused, they kicked me out. But karma had different plans. From the moment I was old enough to understand the concept of fairness, it was clear that in our household, fairness was a flexible term, heavily skewed in favor of my younger sister, Jennifer. It wasn't that our parents were mean or neglectful toward me, it's just that Jennifer, with her bubbly charm and endless demands, seemed to capture all their attention and resources. As kids, our rooms told the first part of the story. Jennifer's room was painted her favorite shade of pink the moment she declared it her favorite color, adorned with posters of her favorite pop stars and shelves overflowing with toys and books. Mine remained the dull beige it had been since we moved in, with furniture that was functional but definitely had seen better days. If I wanted something, the answer was usually "we'll see," which often translated to "probably not." This trend of favoritism wasn't just confined to material things. It extended into how our achievements and milestones were celebrated. I remember my 10th birthday vividly. I had been really into art at the time, spending hours drawing and coloring. I thought maybe just this once my passion would be acknowledged. Instead, I received a pack of generic colored pencils. Fast forward 2 years, and Jennifer's 10th birthday was an extravagant affair with pony rides and a custom cake shaped like a castle. Everything a kid could dream of and more. School was no different. I was a decent student, always trying my best to bring home good grades, hoping that maybe this would be the thing that would get me a bit of the praise Jennifer seemed to get so effortlessly. I made the honor roll several times in high school, each time rushing home with the certificate, hoping for a reaction that amounted to more than an indifferent "that's nice." But when Jennifer got a B+ on a test, it was as if she had won a Nobel Prize. They even took her out for a fancy dinner to celebrate, something that never happened with my academic achievements. As we grew older, the material and emotional discrepancies grew even starker. High school graduation is supposed to be a big deal for every teenager, right? When I graduated, I got a handshake from Dad and a card with $50 from Mom, which was nice but pretty underwhelming. It felt like a pat on the back rather than a celebration of years of hard work. But when it was Jennifer's turn to graduate, the whole 9 yards rolled out. A brand new car waited for her in the driveway, complete with a big red bow. That night, they threw a party that felt more like a royal banquet. Relatives I hadn't seen in years showed up, and there was so much food and laughter, the kind that had been absent during my own graduation. Living under this constant shadow of indifference, I started to feel like maybe I was the problem. Maybe there was something inherently unlovable about me, or perhaps I just wasn't meant to succeed. These thoughts took a toll, and I found myself grappling with anxiety and depression. No amount of personal achievement seemed to bridge the gap between how our parents treated Jennifer and me. It wasn't just the material things. I could get over not having the newest gadgets or designer clothes. But the emotional disparity was debilitating. I felt unseen, unheard, and fundamentally inadequate. When I found a good job that was paying good money, I broke the news to my parents. Their reaction was predictably practical. They didn't ask if I had found a nice place or if I was excited about this new chapter in my life. Instead, they saw it as a financial opportunity for themselves, immediately suggesting that I should start saving up for Jennifer's future wedding, despite her not even being in a relationship. It was always about her, about preparing for her needs and wants. They seemed to view my income as another resource to be allocated for Jennifer's benefit. I tried to protest, to explain that I had my own life and financial goals to consider. Their response was a mix of disappointment and disbelief. How could I be so selfish? Wasn't family supposed to come first? The guilt was immense. Years of being conditioned to put Jennifer first made it incredibly hard to advocate for myself. But deep down, I knew that if I didn't start setting boundaries now, I would never be able to lead the life I wanted. So I made a plan. I would contribute a small amount to this hypothetical wedding fund to keep the peace, but I would also start saving secretly for my own dreams. I had always wanted to start my own business, a niche apparel company for little girls, focusing on frocks and dresses. It was a dream I had harbored for years, and with my new job, I finally had a chance to make it a reality. If only I could navigate the financial and emotional minefields that came with my family dynamics. As much as I'd like to say things got better as Jennifer and I got older, that just wouldn't be true. The favoritism that marked our childhood only seemed to intensify with each passing year, especially as we moved into those big milestone moments that every family likes to celebrate. But in our house, some celebrations were more equal than others. Jennifer's Sweet 16 was a spectacle right out of a movie. Our backyard transformed into a fairy tale garden with twinkling lights strung from every possible point, a DJ blasting the latest hits, and a buffet spread that could feed an army. Friends, family, and practically half the school turned out for what had been dubbed the event of the year. I remember watching her blow out the candles on her massive 3-tiered birthday cake, surrounded by a crowd of adoring guests. It was her moment, her day. Everyone said so, and they weren't wrong. 2 years earlier, my own 16th had passed with considerably less fanfare. I got a happy birthday in the morning, a pat on the back from Dad, and a new book. Don't get me wrong, I love to read, and it was a good book. But there was no party, no gathering of friends and family. It was just another day in the life of the less favored child. I remember feeling a mix of relief and disappointment. Relieved because I didn't have to face the potential embarrassment of a poorly attended party, but disappointed because, well, it would have been nice to feel special, even just for a day. The pattern repeated itself when it came time for college decisions. I had applied to a few places and got accepted into a decent state school. I was proud of myself, considering I managed the application process on my own without much guidance. When I told my parents, they nodded and offered a tepid, "Congratulations." That was the extent of it. There was no celebration, no family dinner out. I was expected to figure out the logistics and finances on my own, which I did, by taking on more hours at my part-time job and securing a small loan. Jennifer's college acceptance, however, was a different story entirely. She applied to one of the most prestigious private universities in the country, her dream school. When the acceptance letter arrived, it was as if she had single-handedly cured a global pandemic. The celebrations were immediate and extravagant. My parents threw a huge party, the same day the letter came, with champagne and a fancy cake proclaiming, "Congratulations, Jennifer." Relatives I hadn't seen since Jennifer's sweet 16 poured into our house, bringing gifts and praising her achievement as though she had leapt over the moon. Throughout the party, I stood on the sidelines, watching the spectacle and feeling like a ghost in my own home. No one asked about my plans, my college, or how I felt. It was all about Jennifer, always about Jennifer. I remember retreating to my room early that evening, feeling a familiar sting of tears that I quickly wiped away. It wasn't just the lack of attention that hurt. It was the profound sense of isolation within my own family, the unshakable feeling of being perpetually second best, no matter what I did. College life offered me the anonymity and fresh start I craved. Here no one knew Jennifer, and I wasn't overshadowed by her accomplishments. I made friends, joined clubs, and even started dating a little. For the first time, I felt like I was more than just Jennifer's older sibling. I was my own person, with my own interests and ambitions. Despite the newfound freedom and personal growth, the inequity at home never fully left my mind. Each phone call with my parents somehow looped back to Jennifer's college experiences, her new friends, and the exciting opportunities she was exploring. My own updates were met with polite but disengaged responses. It was clear that my college adventures, no matter how enriching or successful, would never hold the same weight. Navigating this dynamic was a balancing act. On one hand, I wanted to pull away, to shield myself from the constant comparisons and disappointments. On the other, I still longed for my parents' approval and love, as elusive as they seemed. This internal conflict was a constant companion throughout my college years, a reminder of the complicated family ties that bound me, even as I tried to stand on my own. As graduation neared, I braced myself for another round of unequal celebrations. I planned a small dinner with friends to mark the occasion, knowing better than to expect any grand gestures from home. It was bittersweet, acknowledging how far I had come despite the lack of support, but also realizing that in my parents' eyes, I might never measure up to Jennifer, no matter what I achieved. But I was learning, slowly and painfully, that perhaps I didn't need to. After graduation, the real world hit me like a ton of bricks. I was armed with a degree and a boatload of ambition, but also the stark realization that I was pretty much on my own. My parents had made it clear during college that they expected me to be self-sufficient, which was fair to a degree. I didn't mind the independence. In fact, I craved it after years of living in Jennifer's shadow. But what I hadn't anticipated was the weight of financial expectations they would place on me, not for my own future, but for Jennifer's. I landed my first real job about 3 months after graduation. It wasn't glamorous, just a basic entry-level position at a local marketing firm. But it was a foot in the door, and I was determined to work my way up. The pay was decent. I was proud of myself, managing to scrape together a living without leaning on anyone else. When I first told my parents about the job, I hoped for some kind of acknowledgement, maybe even a hint of pride. Instead, their reaction was muted, almost as if they expected more. "That's nice, dear," was the extent of their enthusiasm. There was no congratulatory dinner, no celebratory phone calls, just a brief acknowledgement before the conversation shifted back to Jennifer, as it always did. Jennifer was still in college at the time, living it up at her fancy private university, her expenses fully covered by my parents. She called me occasionally, mostly to brag about her social life or complain about her workload. I listened, offered advice, and bit back the envy that gnawed at me whenever I hung up the phone. About a year into my job, something shifted at home. My parents started hinting about financial contributions, specifically how I should start thinking about helping out with Jennifer's future expenses. At first it was subtle, just offhand comments about how expensive Jennifer's senior year was going to be, or the cost of living in the city where she wanted to intern. But then the hints became requests, and the requests became demands. One evening, during one of our dinners that actually involved a two-way conversation, my mom laid it out plainly. "You know, Tom, now that you're working and all, we were thinking it might be nice if you could start setting aside some money for Jennifer's graduation, maybe help out with her student loans when the time comes." I was taken aback. "Mom, I'm just getting started myself. I have loans too, and rent, and—" "But you're the older sibling," she interrupted, her tone firm. "It's your responsibility to help out. We've put so much into Jennifer's education, it wouldn't be fair for you not to contribute." The notion baffled me. Fair? What about all the years of imbalance, of celebrations for Jennifer's every minor achievement, while my milestones passed without fanfare? What about the fact that I had struggled through college financially, while Jennifer had everything handed to her on a silver platter? I tried to voice my thoughts, to explain how this expectation felt unfair and one-sided, but as usual, my concerns were brushed off. "You're being too sensitive," my dad chimed in. "We're just asking for a little family support here." The conversation left me reeling. I was frustrated, hurt, and angry. I had worked hard to establish my independence, to prove that I could make it on my own, and now they were asking me to hand over my hard-earned money to support the golden child, the sister who had never once had to worry about money or make any real sacrifices. Despite my resistance, the pressure didn't let up. Over the next few months, every call seemed to include some mention of my financial obligations to Jennifer. When I received a modest raise at work, my parents saw it as an opportunity for me to increase my contributions to Jennifer's fund. It was as if my own financial goals and responsibilities didn't matter, as if my sole purpose was to ensure Jennifer's comfort and success. Feeling cornered and obligated, I agreed to a small monthly contribution. It wasn't much, but it was what I could spare without jeopardizing my own financial stability. I hoped this would appease my parents and put an end to the constant badgering. But internally, I felt a deep resentment building, not just toward my parents, but toward Jennifer as well, even though I knew it wasn't entirely her fault. This financial strain added a new layer of tension to our already complicated family dynamics. I felt like I was being used, like my own aspirations and needs were secondary to Jennifer's. It wasn't just about money, it was about the fundamental lack of fairness that had colored my relationship with my parents my entire life. I was always the afterthought, the backup plan, never the priority. The situation forced me to reevaluate my relationship with my family. I began to pull back, to protect my own mental and emotional well-being. I still attended family gatherings and maintained a surface-level relationship with my parents and Jennifer, but I kept my personal life and my finances closely guarded. Life has a funny way of throwing you a lifeline just when you think you're about to sink. For me, that lifeline came in the form of a $500,000 lottery win, a stroke of luck so unexpected it felt like I had stepped into an alternate reality. But as thrilling as it was to suddenly have $500,000 in my bank account, this windfall also brought a new set of challenges, particularly with my family. I found out I had won on a Tuesday evening. I remember staring at the lottery website, refreshing the page over and over again, unable to believe my eyes. The numbers matched perfectly. I had actually won. After years of scraping by, of budgeting every dollar and feeling like I was always on the financial back foot, this was a game changer. I didn't tell anyone at first. I spent a sleepless night thinking about all the things I could do with the money. I thought about paying off my student loans, investing in some real estate, maybe even taking a trip to Europe, something I'd always dreamed of but never thought possible. But above all, I thought about my business idea, a niche apparel company for little girls. It was a dream I had harbored for years, something I was truly passionate about, but had never had the resources to pursue. A few days later, after I had confirmed the win with the lottery office and set up an appointment with a financial advisor, I decided it was time to tell my family. I knew this would be a delicate conversation, given our complicated history and the ongoing tensions over money. I called a family meeting. After dessert, I finally broke the news. "I won the lottery," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. $500,000. The reaction was immediate and intense. My parents stared at me, mouths agape, while Jennifer squealed with excitement. For a moment, there was a buzz of congratulations, hugs, and laughter. It felt good to share the news, to see their genuine happiness for me. But then, as the initial shock wore off, the conversation took a predictable turn. "That's incredible, Tom. You know, this could really help with Jennifer's grad school," my mom said, her tone hopeful, almost expectant. "Yeah," my dad chimed in. "Think about what this could mean for her future. You could fully fund her education abroad. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." I felt my stomach knot. This was exactly what I had feared. The money had barely settled in my account, and already they were making plans for it, plans that had nothing to do with my dreams or needs. "I've actually been thinking about that," I said, drawing a deep breath. "I'm planning to use the money to start my own business. It's something I've always wanted to do, and now I finally have the chance." The room went quiet. My parents exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from excitement to confusion, and then to disappointment. "But what about Jennifer?" my mom asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Don't you think helping your sister should be your priority?" I could feel the old guilt creeping in, the familiar pressure to put Jennifer's needs above my own. But this time, something was different. This time, I had the means to change my own life, to pursue my own happiness. I wasn't going to give that up, not again. "I love Jennifer and I want the best for her," I said firmly. "But I need to think about my own future, too. I've been putting her needs ahead of mine for most of our lives. Now I need to use this opportunity for myself." The conversation that followed was difficult. My parents argued that as the older sibling, it was my duty to support Jennifer. They said I was being selfish, that family should come first. The same old lines, the same old guilt trips. But I stood my ground. For the first time, I felt like I had the power to make my own decisions, to define my own priorities. It wasn't just about the money. It was about respect, about finally being seen as an individual with my own goals and dreams. They insisted that I needed to hand over all the money so they could send Jennifer to an elite graduate program abroad. Apparently, she'd always dreamed of studying in Europe, and this was my chance to make it happen. I was stunned. Here I was with a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to change my life, and they expected me to just give it all away to fund my sister's whims. When I told them I planned to use the money to start my business, they flew into a rage. They called me selfish and ungrateful. They said I was a terrible son and brother for not putting family first. According to them, I owed it to Jennifer to fund her dreams, since our parents had sacrificed everything for us growing up. I stood my ground and refused to give them the money. I explained that I had my own goals and aspirations that were just as valid as Jennifer's, but they wouldn't hear it. They gave me an ultimatum: either hand over the lottery winnings or move out immediately. It was a hard decision, but I chose to leave. I packed up my things and found a small apartment across town. My parents and sister haven't spoken to me since. Sometimes I feel guilty and wonder if I did the right thing. But another part of me feels free for the first time in my life. Edit. Wow, I wasn't expecting this post to blow up like it did. Thank you all for the supportive comments and advice. I've read through everything and appreciate the perspective. I'll post an update soon with some more details on how things have progressed. Update 1. It's been about 3 months since my original post and a lot has happened. I wanted to give an update on the situation with my family and my plans going forward. After moving out of my parents' house, I threw myself into my work. I was determined to save as much money as possible to get my business off the ground, but I also wanted to prove to myself that I could succeed on my own terms. About a month after I left, my parents reached out to me. I was hopeful at first that they wanted to reconcile, but it quickly became clear they had an agenda. They started by saying they missed me and wanted to make amends. Then they dropped the real reason for the call. Apparently, Jennifer had been accepted into her dream graduate program at a prestigious university in London. My parents were thrilled, of course, but there was a catch. The tuition and living expenses were astronomical. They didn't have nearly enough saved up to cover it. That's where I came in. They wanted me to loan them a large portion of my lottery winnings to fund Jennifer's education. They promised they'd pay me back eventually, but I knew that was unlikely to happen. When I hesitated, they laid on the guilt trip thick. They talked about how this was Jennifer's one shot at her dreams, how she'd be devastated if she couldn't go, how I'd be ruining her future if I didn't help. I stood firm and told them no. I explained again that I was using that money to start my own business. They got angry and accused me of being selfish again. My mom actually said, "I guess the money has changed you. You used to care about your family." That really stung. I've always cared about my family, even when they didn't seem to care much about me. But I realized in that moment that nothing I ever did would be enough for them. I'd always be the bad guy in their eyes unless I gave them everything they wanted. So I made a decision. I told them that I was done being their ATM, that I loved them, but I needed to put myself first for once, and that if they couldn't respect my choices, then maybe we needed some time apart. They didn't take it well. There was a lot of yelling and crying. My dad said I was dead to him if I didn't help Jennifer. In the end, I had to hang up on them mid-tirade. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. After that call, I blocked their numbers for a while. I needed space to process everything and focus on my goals. I threw myself into planning my business launch. I did tons of research, networked with other entrepreneurs, and started putting together a solid business plan. About a month ago, I took the plunge and quit my day job to focus on my company full-time. It was scary, but also exhilarating. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly in control of my future. I've spent the last few weeks setting up my workshop and getting everything in order. I've hired a few part-time seamstresses to help with production. We're starting small with an online store, but I have plans to expand into brick-and-mortar locations if things go well. My first collection of girls' frocks and dresses is almost ready to launch. I'm nervous, but excited to see how they're received. I've put my heart and soul into every design, and I truly believe in the quality of our products throughout this process. I've had moments of doubt, times where I wondered if I was making a huge mistake. But then I remind myself of how far I've come and how much happier I am now that I'm living life on my own terms. I still haven't heard from my parents or Jennifer. Part of me misses them and wishes things could be different. But another part of me feels lighter and freer than I have in years. I'm learning to be okay with the distance and focusing on building the life I want. So that's where things stand now. I'm about to launch my dream business and start a new chapter in my life. I'm nervous but optimistic about the future. Thank you all again for your support and encouragement. It really helped give me the strength to stand my ground and pursue my goals. I'll post another update down the road to let you know how the business launch goes and if there are any new developments with my family. Wish me luck. Update 2. It's been about 6 months since my last update, and I wanted to share some major developments that have happened recently. First, some good news. My apparel business has really taken off. Our online store has been doing great with steady sales and lots of repeat customers. The frocks and dresses have been a hit, especially our line of matching sibling outfits. We've even had a few of our designs featured in some popular parenting blogs. About 2 months ago, I took a big leap and opened a small brick-and-mortar boutique. It was nerve-wracking, but it's been doing well so far. There's something really special about seeing little girls try on our dresses in person and twirl around the store. It makes all the hard work feel worth it. I've been working long hours, but I love what I'm doing. For the first time in my life, I feel truly fulfilled and proud of my accomplishments. And the best part is, I did it all on my own terms. Now, for the not-so-good news. Last week, I got an unexpected call from my parents. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I should. As soon as I picked up, I could tell something was wrong. My mom was crying, and my dad sounded more subdued than I'd ever heard him. They told me that Jennifer had gotten into some serious trouble. Apparently, she'd been working part-time at a local boutique while applying to grad schools. My parents had been supporting her financially, but it wasn't enough to fund her lavish lifestyle, so Jennifer had started stealing money from the cash register at work. She'd gotten away with it for a while, but she finally got caught red-handed trying to pocket some cash. The store owner called the police and Jennifer was arrested. My parents were frantic. They didn't have enough money for bail, let alone a lawyer. They were calling to ask, or rather beg, for my help. They needed several $1,000s to get Jennifer out of jail and start building her legal defense. I was conflicted. On one hand, I was still hurt by how they treated me. A part of me wanted to tell them they'd made their bed and now they had to lie in it. But on the other hand, I knew jail could be a dangerous place, especially for a young woman. After thinking it over, I decided to help. But on my terms, I agreed to pay Jennifer's bail. But I made it clear this was a one-time thing. I told my parents I'd transfer the money directly to the bail bondsman, not to them. And I made it clear that this didn't mean I was opening my wallet for them whenever they wanted. They were grateful, albeit a bit taken aback by my conditions. For once, they didn't argue or try to guilt me into giving more. I think the gravity of the situation had finally made them realize they couldn't keep taking me for granted. After Jennifer was released, my parents called again. This time, their tone was different. They actually apologized for how they'd treated me over the years. They said seeing me succeed with my business while Jennifer floundered had opened their eyes to how unfair they'd been. They asked if I'd consider moving back home, saying they missed me and wanted to make amends. I was touched but wary. I told them I appreciated the apology but that I was happy living independently. I suggested we start with small steps, maybe a family dinner once a month to rebuild our relationship slowly. They agreed, seeming to understand that they couldn't just expect things to go back to normal overnight. We've had 2 dinners so far, and while things are still a bit awkward, it feels like we're making progress. As for Jennifer, she's facing some serious charges. My parents are scrambling to find her a good lawyer. They haven't asked me for more money, which I appreciate. I hope this serves as a wake-up call for her to get her act together. So that's where things stand now. My business is thriving. I'm cautiously rebuilding my relationship with my family, and I'm feeling more confident and self-assured than ever before. It hasn't been an easy road, but I'm proud of how far I've come. Thank you all again for your support throughout this journey. Your encouragement really helped me stay strong and stick to my convictions. I'm excited to see what the future holds.
This story is titled, "My Niece Stole From Me and Listed It Online. Her parents' reaction left me speechless." So I've been building my perfume collection for years now. I started when I was a broke teenager, working my first job at a fast food place, saving up for months to buy my first real bottle. Fast forward a couple of decades, and I'm sitting on this massive collection of over 400 bottles. Yeah, it sounds a bit much, but it's my thing. Some people collect stamps or coins. Me, I'm into fragrances. There are bottles that I spent hundreds on, others that are super rare, and honestly, the collection's worth more than I'd like to admit. I'll give people a sample here and there if they're interested. I'm not stingy about it. My friends know about it, and I'm always cool with letting them try a spray or two if they're curious. But my niece, well, she took things to a different level. Now, let me explain how this went down. I thought I was doing my sister a favor by letting my 17-year-old niece, let's call her M, come over to my place to walk my dog. She'd been asking for some extra cash, and I figured why not throw her a few bucks to help me out? My dog likes her, she lives nearby, and I didn't think twice about it. She'd swing by, walk the dog, maybe hang out a bit if she wanted, and head home. Easy. But lately, I started noticing something off about my perfumes. Like a few bottles just looked different. Some had way less liquid than I remembered, and a couple of them were even missing the caps, which I found on the other side of my dresser. At first, I thought maybe I'd been using more than I realized, but after a while, the math wasn't adding up. I was seeing dents in some of my favorite bottles, ones I only wear on special occasions or hadn't even touched in weeks. My gut was telling me something wasn't right, but I figured maybe I was just being paranoid. Until one random night, I'm scrolling through Instagram. I don't know how, but I ended up stumbling across M's private account. And yep, she somehow let me see her stories without blocking me. The second I clicked on it, I was like, oh, hell no. There it was, right in my face. A bunch of little stories advertising my perfumes. Like she was holding my actual bottles in her hand, showing off these decants, little sample vials, and even listing prices for each one. My stomach dropped. She had everything on there too. Photos of my Baccarat Rouge bottle, which cost me over $300, and then Burberry Her, Daisy, Flower Bomb, you name it. All on sale in these little samples that she was selling off to her friends. This wasn't a few sprays here and there. She'd turned my collection into her personal side hustle. And of course, she thought she was being slick because she had her profile set to private. Like, yeah, okay, because nobody's ever going to see that? The part that really got to me was how casual she was about it. She'd been doing it for weeks, based on the stories I was scrolling through, like a full-blown perfume reseller. And she was charging a solid amount too, like $20 for 5 milliliters of Baccarat Rouge. I could feel my blood boiling just thinking about how much money she'd ripped from me. It wasn't just a little oops moment. This was planned, deliberate, and honestly, disrespectful. I trusted her to be in my space, and she was treating it like her own personal department store. I stayed up that night going through each story, taking screenshots and making notes of every bottle she'd posted. I figured if I was going to confront her, I was coming with receipts. Literally. By the end, I had a list of 15 perfumes she'd taken chunks out of. I started calculating, trying to figure out exactly how much she'd cost me. Some of these perfumes aren't easy to replace, especially the rare ones that I ordered from niche sites or even overseas. There's time, effort, and money that go into a collection like this, and she just tossed that all aside for her little side gig. The next day, I checked my bottles again just to be sure, and yep, the dents were exactly where I'd suspected. I couldn't even smell my Baccarat Rouge without thinking about her grubby little hands dumping it into tiny vials to sell for lunch money, or whatever she needed cash for. She had no idea what she was doing either. I mean, there's an art to decanting perfumes properly so you don't ruin the fragrance, but she clearly didn't give a damn. She was just dumping stuff into random vials, probably spilling as much as she was saving. What pissed me off most was that she didn't even think about the fact that I'd notice. She just assumed I wouldn't care or wouldn't realize. I don't know if she thought she was being slick or if she was genuinely that clueless, but it rubbed me the wrong way. I mean, if you're gonna steal, at least be smart about it, right? But no, she just banked on me not paying attention, as if I don't take pride in what I've built. By the end of it, I'd tallied up over $500 in damages. And that's probably lowballing it because, honestly, I don't know how much she spilled or wasted while filling those vials. But between the bottles with huge dents and the full bottles she swiped, it was a decent chunk of change. I spent the next few days just sitting on the info, fuming every time I looked at my perfumes. I knew I was going to confront her, but I wanted to make sure I had everything lined up. I went through every bottle, noting down exactly how much was missing and confirming it against her Instagram posts. I had all the evidence, and I was ready to lay it out for her and my sister. Because this was beyond just a teenage mistake, let's be clear. I wouldn't have cared if she wanted a few sprays. I wouldn't have minded if she asked for a couple of samples for her friends. But stealing? Selling? I couldn't believe she'd go there, and I was ready to show her just how big of a mess she'd gotten herself into. So, after sitting on this info for a couple of days, I knew I couldn't let it slide. I gave my sister a call, asked if I could swing by for a chat. Of course, she had no idea what was coming. I drove over there, rehearsing everything I was about to say. I had my printed out list of perfumes, and I wasn't holding back. When I got there, my niece was hanging out in the living room, totally oblivious, probably scrolling through TikTok or planning her next sale. I had to bite my tongue from going off on her right then and there. My sister came in, all smiles, and we sat down at the kitchen table. I cut to the chase. I didn't waste time with any small talk, just laid my list out on the table and asked, "Do you know what this is?" She looked down, confused at first, until she saw her daughter's little perfume business in black and white. I started explaining everything I'd found, the missing perfumes, the Instagram stories, the prices M had been charging. My sister's face went from confused to horrified real fast. M walked in and froze the second she saw the look on her mom's face. My sister turned to her, and the only thing she could say was, "Please tell me this isn't true." M started stammering, making all kinds of excuses, saying stuff like, "I thought you wouldn't mind." "It's not that big a deal." "I was gonna tell you." "Yeah, sure." She was full of it, and we all knew it. I cut her off, asking her if she really thought I wouldn't notice $500 worth of perfume missing from my collection. She didn't have an answer. She just stood there, silent, looking like a deer in headlights. I went off, telling her that she wasn't some innocent kid who didn't know better. She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't a couple of spritzes for her friends. This was straight up theft, and if she'd pulled this on anyone else, they'd probably be calling the cops right now. My sister tried to jump in, saying, "Come on, she's just a kid." But I wasn't having it. I told her this wasn't some innocent little mistake. She broke my trust, lied to my face, and had been selling off my stuff behind my back. I laid out every single detail, making sure my sister and M knew just how much this little side gig had cost me. I could tell my sister was getting defensive, trying to soften the whole situation, but I wasn't letting her twist this into some learning moment. I told her, "Look, I don't care if she's your daughter. She's 17. She knew damn well what she was doing. She wanted to make a quick buck, and she thought I'd just let it slide." Then came the part I knew was going to be tough. I demanded they pay me back in full. I told them the total based on what she'd posted, what she took, and how much those bottles were worth. My sister's eyes practically bulged out of her head. She tried to tell me that they couldn't afford to just shell out that kind of cash, that M had been saving up for a car, and this would wipe her savings out completely. I shrugged. That wasn't my problem. I looked at M and said, "If you're old enough to be a little businesswoman, you're old enough to face the consequences when you screw people over. I could see her start to tear up, but I wasn't going to let that guilt trip me. She wasn't crying when she was stealing my stuff and selling it off, was she? At this point, my sister's tone shifted, going from defensive to straight up annoyed. She started saying that I was overreacting, that this was just perfume, and that I was ruining her daughter's future over something material. That really set me off. I told her that maybe if she'd actually disciplined her daughter, instead of letting her get away with crap like this, we wouldn't be sitting here in the first place. I told her that M could have faced way worse consequences if she'd done this to anyone else. I reminded her that I was well within my rights to go to the police, but I was giving them a chance to settle this between us. M finally spoke up, muttering something about how she thought it wasn't a big deal because I had so many perfumes and wouldn't notice. That got me. I asked her, "Do you think I bought all those perfumes just so you could come in and take them whenever you want?" She just stood there, looking down at the floor, not saying a word. I told her that she clearly didn't understand or appreciate what it meant to respect other people's things. My sister tried one last time to smooth things over, offering to pay me back in installments or figure something out, but I wasn't having it. I told her I wanted the full amount by the end of the month. I said that if they didn't pay me back, I'd go through other channels to get what I was owed. My sister started to argue, but I cut her off saying, "I'm done talking about this. You two figure it out, but I want every penny back." Before I left, I made it clear that M wasn't welcome in my house anymore. I told my sister that if she ever wanted to try and repair this mess, she'd better start by holding her daughter accountable instead of making excuses for her. M tried to mumble an apology, but I wasn't in the mood to hear it. I told her she could apologize with her wallet. As I walked out, I could hear my sister trying to scold M, and M still trying to make excuses. I didn't even care anymore. All I wanted was my money back and for them to realize they couldn't just treat people like this. And if my niece learned something from it, maybe she'd think twice before pulling this kind of crap on someone else. So yeah, that was the showdown. I walked out of there feeling a bit of relief, but also kind of pissed that it even had to come to this. I thought I was just doing my niece a favor with some dog-walking cash, and here I am, out hundreds of dollars, and having to spell out basic respect to both of them. After the showdown at my sister's place, I thought the worst was over. I figured they'd take a few days to cool off, maybe realize how badly they messed up, and just pay me back. I mean, I wasn't asking for anything unreasonable. I just wanted what I was owed. But apparently that was too much to expect. What I didn't see coming was the backlash that would come from the rest of the family. Suddenly, it was like everyone had an opinion, and none of them were on my side. The day after I confronted them, I started getting calls. First was my mom, who rang me up early in the morning, going on and on about how family doesn't treat each other this way. She pulled the whole, "she's your niece and she's just a kid" routine, saying I was being way too hard on her. According to her, I was supposed to just let it go and move on, because it's just perfume. Yeah, sure, Mom. Just ignore the fact that this kid cost me hundreds of dollars. I told her straight up that if anyone wanted to foot the bill, they were welcome to chip in. But I wasn't letting it go. She didn't like that answer and went on about how I was being too harsh and acting out of anger. I asked her what she'd do if someone went into her house, stole hundreds of dollars worth of stuff, and started selling it. Would she be cool with that? She tried to dodge the question and just kept going on about family values and forgiveness. It was the same speech I'd heard growing up, every time someone in the family messed up and tried to skate by without consequences. I wasn't buying it this time. Then my aunt called, apparently after my mom had gotten to her. She was much more direct, saying she thought I was ruining my relationship with my niece over a stupid collection. I told her, "You have no idea what my collection is worth, so let's not pretend it's stupid." She tried to guilt trip me, asking if I wanted to be the reason M couldn't get her first car. Like, somehow this whole thing was now my fault? Apparently, M had gone crying to the family about how her mean uncle was demanding all this money, which was going to drain her car savings. She twisted the story into something like she'd just borrowed a few perfumes, and I was being a tyrant. My aunt kept bringing up how devastated M was, how she was just trying to do something nice for her friends. I couldn't believe it. Here was my niece running a damn perfume racket, and somehow I was the villain? I kept my cool, but I told my aunt that M could consider this an expensive lesson in respecting other people's property. My aunt just sighed and said something like, "I just hope you're happy with yourself." Yeah, well, I'd be a lot happier if people stopped acting like I'd committed some crime here. By the end of the day, I'd heard from just about every relative with a phone. Some were trying to play peacemaker, suggesting I compromise or work something out so M wouldn't lose all her savings. Others just flat out told me I was overreacting. Not a single one of them seemed to care that M had been stealing from me for weeks, maybe even months, and had absolutely no intention of stopping until I caught her. The way they were talking, you'd think I was the one who'd stolen from her. Then my sister called, and let me tell you, she was not happy. She came at me with this whole, "You're tearing the family apart over something so petty" spiel. I told her it wasn't petty to me. I'd worked hard for that collection, and I wasn't about to let her daughter's little business ruin it. She started yelling, saying I was destroying M's future, that I was being selfish, and that I needed to grow up and be the bigger person. I asked her if she'd feel the same way if it were her things that M had stolen and sold. She went quiet for a second, but then went right back to blaming me. Apparently, M's devastated because she's had to take down her Instagram account and refund some of the sales she'd already made. Good. Maybe she'll think twice before swiping stuff that isn't hers. But my sister acted like this was some kind of tragedy, saying M was humiliated, that she was so embarrassed now that she couldn't buy her car. I told her that if M was embarrassed, maybe she should have thought about that before starting a damn resale business in my living room. After that call, I just felt drained. I was angry, sure, but I was more disappointed. The fact that my family could look at this situation, where I was clearly the one who'd been wronged, and still side with M was just, I don't know, frustrating. I tried explaining to a couple of cousins that it wasn't about the money, it was about the trust. M had totally broken any trust I had in her, and if my sister wasn't going to make her own kid take responsibility, then I was damn well going to make sure she did. Then, a few days later, my mom texted me this long message about family therapy. She said she thought it would be good for all of us to sit down and work through this. I almost laughed out loud reading it. Like, yeah, Mom, I'm going to sit in a room and have everyone tell me how wrong I am for expecting basic respect. I told her I didn't need therapy. I needed my money back. She didn't respond. As the days went on, I noticed a bit of a shift. A couple of family members started to cool off and see my side of things. My cousin, who works in retail, actually called me and said she got it because she sees people try to pull scams all the time. She said she couldn't believe M thought she'd get away with it and told me she was on my side. But for the most part, everyone else just stopped talking to me altogether, like I was the one who'd gone rogue. It's weird when you're in the right, but you're made to feel like the outcast. So here I am, basically the family pariah, because I dared to stand up for myself. M and her mom still haven't paid me back, and it's looking like they're just going to keep pushing this poor M angle, hoping I'll back down. But I'm not going to. I've made it clear to them that if I don't get my money by the end of the month, they're going to have a much bigger problem. And they can tell the whole family whatever they want about me, but I'm not letting this go. So, yeah, this is where we're at. Half the family thinks I'm some kind of monster. My sister thinks I'm out to ruin her daughter's life, and I'm just sitting here wondering how the hell they'd feel if the tables were turned. Maybe one day they'll get it, but honestly, I'm not holding my breath. Update. So a couple of weeks go by, and I haven't heard much from my sister or M. Honestly, I thought maybe they'd finally decided to just pay me back and let this mess be done with. But no, instead, I get this text from my sister saying M wants to apologize in person, and that it'd be good for everyone to talk things out face to face. I already had a bad feeling about it. After all the family drama, I knew this was going to be anything but a real apology. But whatever, I agreed to meet up because maybe, just maybe, they were finally going to do the right thing. We set up the meeting at a coffee shop nearby. I walked in, and there they were. My sister looking all tense, and M sitting there with her arms crossed, looking like this was the last place she wanted to be. Right off the bat, I could tell this apology was going to be a joke. But I sat down, took a deep breath, and waited for them to start. My sister jumped in first, saying, M has something she wants to say. M just kind of rolled her eyes, sighed, and muttered, I'm sorry. It was so half-assed, I could barely believe it. She didn't look at me, didn't actually seem sorry at all. It was like she'd rehearsed the bare minimum of what she thought I'd accept, just so she could say she apologized and be done with it. I wasn't letting that slide, though. I told her, if you're going to apologize, at least look me in the eye and say it like you mean it. She glared at me, but she finally looked up and said, fine, I'm sorry for taking your perfume. But even then, it wasn't a real apology. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of what she'd actually done. She was just annoyed that she got caught. I asked her, do you even understand why what you did was wrong? She just shrugged and said, I guess, but it's just perfume. I thought you wouldn't care. I couldn't believe it. After all this time, she still didn't get it. I told her, it's not about the perfume, Em. It's about trust. I let you into my home. I trusted you around my things, and you decided to take advantage of that. That's the issue here. My sister cut in, trying to play mediator, saying, "She's apologized, and she understands now. Can't we just move on?" I wasn't having that. I told her that saying sorry isn't enough when there's no meaning behind it, especially when she's not taking any responsibility for her actions. Then, M hit me with, "Well, if you didn't want people to touch your stuff, maybe you shouldn't have so much of it lying around." Oh man, that really set me off. I couldn't believe she had the audacity to act like this was somehow my fault. I told her, "Having a collection doesn't give you the right to steal from it. Just because I have a lot of something doesn't mean you can take it whenever you feel like it." M rolled her eyes again, and I could see my sister getting flustered. My sister tried to calm things down, saying, "Let's not turn this into a bigger issue than it needs to be." Bigger issue? We were well past that. I told her, "The issue got big. The second M decided to turn my house into her personal perfume shop." At that point, M actually laughed, which really pissed me off. It was like she thought this whole thing was a joke. I turned to my sister and said, "This is exactly the problem. She doesn't care. She's not sorry she did it. She's just sorry she got caught." My sister tried to defend her, saying, "She's young. She made a mistake. We all did things we regret at her age." I shot back, "Yeah, but I wasn't stealing hundreds of dollars from family members and trying to brush it off like it's no big deal." Then my sister switched tactics, and I could see her putting on the concerned parent act. She looked at me and said, "Honestly, you're taking this way too far. This whole thing has really affected Em. She's been so upset. She's been embarrassed in front of her friends, and now she has no savings left for her car because she's paying you back. Like, okay, am I supposed to feel sorry for her? She did this to herself." I told her, maybe this is the wake-up call she needed. My sister just sighed and said, "I think you're just holding on to this to be difficult. If family doesn't forgive family, what kind of family are we?" I told her, "A real family wouldn't try to screw each other over like this." I could see that my words hit her, but she still looked like she wasn't ready to let M take the blame. After a few minutes of awkward silence, my sister finally said, "Well, M has refunded her friends for the samples she sold, and she's taken down her Instagram. She's done what she can to make it right." I laughed and said, "That's the bare minimum. I'm still out hundreds of dollars, and all I've gotten is a half-hearted sorry." Then, to top it off, M had the nerve to say, "Maybe if you didn't freak out, we wouldn't even have to be here." That was it for me. I looked her dead in the eye and told her, "If you think that's how apologies work, you're going to have a rough time when you grow up." She just huffed and looked away, clearly annoyed that I wasn't letting her off the hook. My sister, seeing that I wasn't budging, finally asked, "Is there anything she can do to make this right?" I told her, "Yes, actually. She can pay me back in full, no excuses, no whining. If she wants forgiveness, she's got to earn it." I could see my sister wasn't thrilled with that, but she didn't argue. I think she realized that if she pushed me any further, I might actually consider taking this to court or doing something else they'd hate even more. We sat in silence for a bit after that, and finally, my sister sighed and said they'd find a way to get the money to me. She looked at M and said, "You're going to have to figure this out." M just groaned, clearly pissed that her little apology didn't get her off the hook. She stormed out of the coffee shop without another word. My sister gave me this tired look, like I was the one making her life difficult, and then said, "I hope you're happy with yourself." I told her, "I will be when I get my money back." She didn't say anything, just turned and left. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling, I don't even know, disappointed? Exhausted? I went in hoping that maybe they'd realize they were in the wrong, but instead they tried to flip it on me, like I was being the unreasonable one. I didn't want to be the villain here, but if that's how they're going to see it, then so be it. At the end of the day, I'm done bending over backward to keep everyone happy. They want to paint me as the bad guy? Fine. All I want is what I'm owed. Final update. All right, so after that disaster of a meeting, I figured things would calm down. They'd either pay me back or ignore me, and I'd move on. But no, it's never that simple. What happened instead was a full-blown family fallout, all because I dared to hold my niece accountable for what she did. You'd think I'd threatened to burn down the family house or something with the way everyone's acting. A few days after that whole coffee shop mess, I got a call from my mom. I braced myself because I knew this wasn't going to be a friendly check-in. Sure enough, she launched into how I'd upset everyone and how this whole ordeal was causing so much stress and division in the family. She was worried about the family dynamic and started suggesting that maybe I should just drop it for the sake of keeping the peace. I just sat there, listening to her list every reason under the sun why I was responsible for this mess. When she finally paused, I told her, "Mom, I didn't cause any of this. Em did when she decided to help herself to my stuff and sell it." She tried to argue that M's just a kid, that she didn't really understand the consequences. I laughed and said, she understood the consequences enough to hide it from me and act all innocent. But my mom wouldn't drop it. She actually tried to pull the, well, I'll pay you back if that's what it takes card. Like I'd suddenly forget what M had done just because my mom offered to throw money at the problem. I told her it wasn't about the money at this point. I wanted M to take responsibility, not dodge it because someone else bailed her out. That's what no one seemed to get. It wasn't about the cash. It was about making her face up to the fact that she messed up and couldn't just get off scot-free because family. Then my mom hit me with, if you keep pushing this, you're going to lose people in the family. Is that really what you want? Like, what? I was floored. They were seriously willing to cut me off because I wanted what I was owed. I told her, if family is that quick to turn their back on me over something like this, maybe they're not worth keeping around. That shut her up pretty fast, and she just hung up. A few days later, I started getting icy responses from other family members. A couple of cousins who I usually got along with stopped responding to my texts. An aunt unfriended me on Facebook. My brother, who I thought was on my side, called to say he understood my frustration, but thought I was being too harsh by making M pay the full amount. He tried to convince me to let it go, just this once, since M was learning her lesson and won't ever do it again. I told him to stay out of it if he wasn't willing to actually understand why I was standing my ground. Then came the family group chat drama. My sister, clearly looking for sympathy, shared a long post about how the whole situation had hurt her family, and how we all make mistakes, and sometimes forgiveness is more valuable than money. I didn't even bother replying. It was clear they were circling the wagons around M, painting her as some innocent kid who'd been unfairly punished by her greedy uncle. Meanwhile, I was just sitting there, wondering when basic respect for other people's stuff went out the window. After about a week of this, I found out that my sister and M had actually reached out to a few other family members to borrow money to pay me back. They were so set on not having M take full responsibility that they were willing to ask for handouts rather than let her use her own savings. And of course, they framed it as, we need help with this huge financial burden. It was so ridiculous. And you know what? They managed to get the money together. My sister finally sent me a bank transfer, covering the amount I'd calculated that M owed. She didn't include a note, not even a here's the money, just the amount and nothing else. But honestly, it felt hollow. Sure, I got my money back, but it didn't feel like the win I thought it'd be. A few days later, I ran into my aunt at the store. She gave me this look, like I'd personally offended her by daring to stand up for myself. She pulled me aside and said something like, you know, there are better ways to teach someone a lesson than by making them miserable. I just looked at her and said, maybe the lesson here is that M shouldn't have taken something that wasn't hers. She rolled her eyes and walked off, muttering something about family loyalty. It's insane how they've all decided I'm the one with the problem here. What really gets me, though, is that my sister and M have made zero effort to apologize since they paid me back. No follow-up, no, hey, we're sorry for all the trouble. Just radio silence. It's like they resent me for making them deal with the consequences of M's actions, and now they're holding a grudge. The whole family's split now. Half of them still aren't talking to me, and the other half only reach out when they need something. A couple of weeks later, my cousin, one of the few who actually sees my side, texted me saying that M was apparently still complaining about the whole thing. She'd been telling her friends that I was the mean uncle who destroyed her life over some stupid perfume. She'd even posted a bunch of vague stories on her Instagram about toxic family and people who only care about money. Honestly, I couldn't care less what her friends think, but it stung knowing she'd learned absolutely nothing from all this. She still thinks she's the victim here. Looking back, I don't regret making them pay me back. I stood my ground, and I'm glad I didn't just let it go because of family loyalty or whatever. But I'd be lying if I said this hasn't left a sour taste in my mouth. It's not even about the money anymore. It's about realizing that my family would rather sweep things under the rug than hold someone accountable when they're clearly in the wrong. I didn't expect a parade or anything, but some respect would have been nice. Instead, I'm the villain, the guy who doesn't care about family, all because I wanted to be treated with basic decency. If anything, this whole experience has shown me who I can actually count on, and it's a much shorter list than I thought. So yeah, that's the fallout. My family's fractured, M's still playing the victim, and I'm left wondering if I was ever truly part of this family to begin with. But hey, at least I've got my collection safe and sound, and from now on, I'll be a hell of a lot more careful about who I trust around my stuff. If they think that makes me the bad guy, then I guess that's just who I am now.
My name is Cindy, and at 47, I never imagined that my life would take such a sudden turn. For years, I had been living what I thought was a stable life. I worked from home, balancing my freelance career with my responsibilities as a wife and mother. My son Greg, the light of my life, had just graduated from university and secured a job at a major company. After all the years of hard work, both for him and for our family, I finally felt a sense of relief. I thought the tough days were behind me. But as it turns out, I was wrong. It all started the day after Greg moved out to begin his new life. I was sitting in the living room, savoring a moment of peace, when my mother-in-law, Agnes, called me into the room. Her tone was cold, almost distant, and immediately I felt a knot form in my stomach. I hadn't expected her to say anything out of the ordinary, but when I stepped into the living room, I could tell something was off. Agnes wasn't one to mince words, and she certainly didn't this time. "Cindy," she began, her voice sharp and unwavering, "your role here is finished. You should leave too. We don't need a burden like you in our house." I stood there frozen. Her words hit me like a truck. My mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. Was she serious? My mouth felt dry as I managed to stammer out, "What do you mean?" Agnes gave me a look of disdain, her expression one of pure indifference. "You are only here to take care of Greg. Now that he's become independent, we have no need for you anymore. Pack your things and get out," she said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. I felt my chest tighten as her words sank in. I had spent years living with this family, raising my son, caring for this household, and now I was being discarded like yesterday's news. Desperate for clarity, I reached for my phone and called my husband, Robert. Surely he would understand. We had built a life together. He wouldn't just cast me aside like this, would he? When Robert answered, I could hear the weariness in his voice. "So my mother told you, huh?" he said, as if this was all some planned event. "We had been planning this for a while. Once Greg was able to live on his own, we thought it would be best for you to move out." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. "Robert, you can't be serious. You want me to leave? After everything we've been through?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before he replied, "Cindy, I'm sorry. But this is the end. Thank you for everything." And with that, he hung up. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling like the ground had just been pulled out from under me. My heart pounded in my chest, and a flood of emotions washed over me. Anger, betrayal, and most of all, confusion. How could my own husband, the father of my child, simply decide that I was no longer needed? What was I supposed to do now? I refused to let it end like this. I stormed downstairs to the store Robert managed on the first floor of our house, determined to confront him. When I arrived, my frustration spilled over. "What is going on, Robert? This can't be real," I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty store. The few employees who were working looked at me with wide eyes, clearly shocked by the scene I was making. Robert hurried out from the back, a look of irritation on his face. "What are you doing?" he hissed, pulling me into the back room. "Stop this disgraceful behavior." I glared at him, my blood boiling. "Disgraceful? You're the one who's disgraceful. You can't just throw me out like I'm nothing," I shot back, my voice shaking with anger. Robert sighed as if I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Cindy, this isn't about you. You and we come from different worlds. I thought you understood that by now. Now that Greg is on his own, we don't need you anymore. It's better for all of us if you just leave." I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. Different worlds? What are you even talking about? We've been married for years. We raised a son together. How can you treat me like this just because Greg is independent now? I demanded, my voice rising with every word. Robert crossed his arms, his expression cool and detached. "Cindy, You've always known that I come from a wealthier background. My family, we have certain expectations. And now that Greg is gone, there's no reason for you to stay. Our lives are simply separate. I felt a lump form in my throat as his words cut deep. Sure, our marriage had been rushed, what some would call a shotgun wedding, but I had always believed that we were building something real. I had been naive, it seemed. From the very beginning, Robert's family had looked down on me. They only tolerated our marriage because I was pregnant with Greg, and even then, they made it clear that they didn't think I was good enough for their son. I remembered how uneasy I had felt when I first moved into their penthouse apartment. It was luxurious, yes, but the atmosphere was cold. Agnes had made it clear from the start that I was not welcome. She would make snide remarks about my background, reminding me that I came from a lower-class family. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking I could win her over with time. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. Living with Robert's family was suffocating. They had no concept of the real world. They lived in a bubble, believing that money would solve all their problems. Robert, like his parents, was obsessed with maintaining an image of wealth and status, even as their financial situation crumbled behind the scenes. They had inherited a fortune, but poor management and a lavish lifestyle had drained their resources. I had been the one keeping our household afloat, working from home to contribute to the bills while they pretended everything was fine. Now, after all those years of sacrifice, they were throwing me out. But as I stood there, staring at Robert, something inside me shifted. I realized that I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need their approval, their acceptance, or their money. In fact, I was the one holding the real power. You know what, Robert? You're right, I said, my voice suddenly calm. We do come from different worlds, and I'm done with yours. He looked at me, confused, as if he hadn't expected me to agree so easily. What are you saying? He asked, his arrogance starting to waver. I'm saying I'll leave, I replied. But don't think for a second that you've won. With that, I turned and walked out of the store, leaving him standing there, dumbfounded. It was the beginning of the end, not for me, but for them. In the weeks that followed, I focused on building my own life. I found a beautiful high-rise condo in the city, one that was even more luxurious than the penthouse I had shared with Robert's family. The view from my balcony was breathtaking, and for the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the suffocating expectations, free from the toxic relationships, and free to live my life on my own terms. But the story wasn't over yet. 2 months after I moved into my new home, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Agnes. Cindy, she began, her voice dripping with condescension. How are you doing? Have you gotten used to living on the streets yet? I couldn't help but smile as I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the glittering skyline. Actually, Agnes, I'm doing quite well. I'm living in a high-rise condo now. The view is absolutely stunning. There was a long pause before she responded, her voice sharp with disbelief. A high-rise condo? Don't be ridiculous. How could someone like you afford that? I chuckled softly. Oh, I've been doing quite well for myself. In fact, I'm living on the 48th floor, twice as high as the 24th floor you used to brag about. I could almost hear her jaw drop on the other end of the line. What? That's impossible. How? I decided it was time to drop the bombshell. You didn't know, did you? The building where Robert's store and your apartment are located. That's my building. I've owned it for the past 15 years. And now that we're no longer family, I'm charging you the full market rent. Agnes sputtered, clearly struggling to process what I had just said. You can't do that. Oh, but I can, I replied, feeling a sense of satisfaction wash over me. $110,000 for the store and $3,000 for your apartment. That's the going rate. You'll have to pay up or move out. She was silent for a long moment before I heard Robert's voice in the background. Give me the phone, Mom, he shouted, clearly panicked. When Robert took over the call, his voice was shaky. Cindy, what's going on? You can't be serious about this rent increase. We can't afford it. I'm very serious, Robert. It's the market price. You were getting a free ride before, but now that we're divorced, you'll have to pay like everyone else. But we don't have that kind of money, he exclaimed, his voice rising in desperation. That's not my problem, I replied coolly. You should have thought about that before you and your family decided to throw me out. In the background, I could hear Agnes shouting, "This can't be true. She's lying." But it was true. For years, they had been living in my building without even realizing it. I had purchased the property as an investment, knowing that their financial situation was deteriorating. And now, they were at my mercy. In the days that followed, I heard through the grapevine that Robert and his family were scrambling to come up with the money. They sold off furniture, jewelry, and anything of value, but it wasn't enough. Eventually, they had no choice but to move out of the apartment and close the store. They ended up in a small, dingy one-room apartment with no bath. Logically, a far cry from the luxurious lifestyle they had once flaunted. As for me, my life had never been better. I was thriving in my career as a game designer, something I had kept hidden from Robert and his family because they looked down on anything that wasn't high class. Little did they know, the gaming industry was booming, and I had made a fortune over the years. Now, I was working with Greg, who had followed in my footsteps and was excelling in the industry. We were planning to move in together soon, in the very same high-rise condo that had become my sanctuary. As I looked out over the city from my balcony, I felt a sense of peace and contentment that I had never known before. Finally, I was free. Free from the chains of a toxic marriage, free from the judgment of a snobbish family, and free to live my life on my own terms. And as I sat there sipping my coffee, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of Robert and his family, so proud, so arrogant, now living in the very circumstances they had once looked down upon. In the end, I had won. And the best part? I didn't need them. Not anymore. My name is Kelly, and 2 years ago my life was shattered when I discovered that my husband, Scott, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. The man I had trusted with my heart, the one who promised to love me forever, was having an affair with my younger sister, Lauren. The pain of their betrayal was unbearable, but the final blow came when they had the audacity to send me an invitation to their wedding. It felt like a cruel joke, a twisted reminder that they had moved on while I was left to pick up the pieces of my broken life, but the betrayal didn't stop there. When my mother told me she would attend the ceremony, it felt like a knife twisting in my already wounded heart. How could she side with them after what they had done to me? I felt utterly alone, abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me the most. However, instead of wallowing in despair, I decided I would not let them get away with this. I had a plan to make them pay for what they had done. Scott and I had met at work, where I was his boss. He was new to the company, and I was responsible for his training. Despite his initial nervousness, he was sincere and eager to learn. We gradually grew closer, and one day he surprised me by asking if I was free on our next day off. It was the first time I saw him so confident outside the office, and it made my heart skip a beat. We started dating, and after 3 months, he asked me to be his girlfriend. Our relationship grew stronger as he became more skilled at his job, earning praise from his supervisors. When Scott got promoted and transferred to a different department, he proposed to me, and I happily agreed. Our wedding went smoothly, and my family, especially Lauren, welcomed him with open arms. Lauren, who was the same age as Scott, seemed particularly taken with him. She often remarked on how lucky I was to have married such a kind man, and how people at work held him in high regard. At the time, Lauren had just broken up with her boyfriend and was yearning for marriage, constantly expressing how envious she was of my happiness. As we settled into married life, I continued to support Scott, both at work and at home. I thought I was doing everything right, but about a year into our marriage, things started to change. Scott began coming home later and later, and we hardly ever had dinner together anymore. When I asked him if everything was okay at work, he brushed me off, saying nothing was wrong. But I could tell something had changed. He used to share everything with me, but now he seemed distant and irritable whenever I brought up work. Desperate to reconnect, I suggested we go to a spa together during our next holiday. Lauren had recommended a place to us, and I thought it would be a perfect way to relax and spend some quality time together. Scott seemed indifferent, but I went ahead and made the reservations anyway. A week before the trip, I reminded him, but he dropped a bombshell. He had to go on a business trip that same weekend. I was disappointed, but he insisted it couldn't be helped, so I canceled our plans. On the day he left for his business trip, I received a call from the hotel where I had booked the spa, confirming our arrival time. Confused, I realized my cancellation hadn't gone through. I decided to invite Lauren instead, thinking it would be a nice way to cheer myself up. But when I called, my parents said Lauren had been out since the morning. As a last resort, I invited my mother, who surprisingly agreed. It seemed she had noticed I had been down lately and wanted to support me. We arrived at the hotel, ready to enjoy our spa day, but what we witnessed instead was something I could never have imagined. There, walking arm in arm, were Scott and Lauren, entering the very hotel where we were supposed to stay. My heart stopped as I realized the woman my husband was with was none other than my sister. They looked so happy together, completely oblivious to the fact that they had been caught. I was in a state of shock as we drove back home. My mother tried to comfort me, but nothing could dull the pain of such a deep betrayal. Scott had been lying to me all along, and so had Lauren. They had been sneaking around behind my back, using his so-called business trips as a cover for their affair. The realization made my anger burn hotter than the sadness. The moment Scott returned from his trip, I was ready. I had already signed a new lease for an apartment and prepared the divorce papers. I left the papers and a letter for Scott, outlining the terms and letting him know that all further communication would be handled through my lawyer. I blocked his number and moved out before he even knew what hit him. I also made sure to keep my new address a secret, not even telling my parents at work. Scott and I still saw each other occasionally, but I ignored him completely. It didn't take long for him to agree to the divorce, understanding that he had no leg to stand on. Our colleagues seemed to sense what had happened, though no one spoke about it openly. The whispers and sideways glances were enough to let Scott know that his reputation had been tarnished. 5 years passed, and I kept my distance from both Scott and my family. I focused on rebuilding my life, and although the pain never fully disappeared, I managed to find a new sense of normalcy. But then one day, after finishing work, I returned home to find my mother standing in front of my door. She was holding an invitation to Scott and Lauren's wedding. They had finally decided to make their relationship official and were brazen enough to invite our parents. "Mom, are you going to attend?" I asked, my voice trembling with the effort to remain calm. "Of course I am," she replied, her tone surprisingly calm. "But don't worry, I have a plan. Just wait and see." On the day of the wedding, my mother called me through a video call. I didn't want to watch, but I remembered her words and stayed on the line. As the wedding ceremony began, a slideshow was presented, featuring photos of the bride. The MC introduced the slides, saying they were a collection of photos from Lauren's birth to the present, lovingly prepared by the bride's mother. I was shocked when I saw the first photo. It wasn't of Lauren, it was of me. The slideshow continued, showing pictures from my childhood, my school days, and even my wedding to Scott. The guests began to murmur in confusion, while Lauren's expression grew increasingly panicked. Scott, too, realized what was happening, his face turning pale as the realization dawned on him. My mother took the stage, smoothly taking over the presentation. She recounted how I had supported Scott, both at work and at home, only to be betrayed by him and Lauren. She then revealed the truth to the stunned audience, showing the photo of Scott and Lauren entering the spa hotel together. The room fell into a shocked silence as the guests finally understood the depth of their deception. Lauren tried to stop her, pleading with her to let it go. But my mother was resolute. She made it clear that she could never forgive them for what they had done to me. She left the venue with my father, leaving behind a room full of people who now saw Scott and Lauren for who they truly were. That day my mother did what I couldn't. she exposed their lies and made them face the consequences of their actions. When I spoke to her later, she apologized for bringing up painful memories, but I thanked her. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted off my shoulders. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more card to play. A few weeks later, during a company-wide presentation, I played the recording of my mother's speech at the wedding. As the truth about Scott's affair with Lauren was revealed to the entire company, the room erupted in whispers and accusations. Scott tried to defend himself, but it was too late. His reputation was in tatters, and everyone knew the real reason for our divorce. The board members, who had once seen Scott as a rising star, quickly turned against him. They informed him that he would be transferred to a remote office, effectively demoting him with plans to lay him off in the near future. Scott's career was over, and he had no one to blame but himself. As for Lauren, her life quickly unraveled as well. She had become a full-time housewife after marrying Scott, but when she learned about his transfer and demotion, she abandoned him without a second thought. She quickly latched onto another man, hoping to maintain her comfortable lifestyle. But this new man was a freeloader, and soon Lauren found herself drowning in debt, working 2 jobs just to stay afloat. Watching Scott and Lauren's lives fall apart brought me a sense of closure. Their betrayal had led to their downfall, and they were finally paying the price for their actions. With this closure, I was able to move on with my life, free from the shadows of the past. I focused on my career, taking on new challenges and receiving a promotion in recognition of my hard work. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and even started dating again. I also took time to explore hobbies I had neglected, like painting, which brought me a sense of peace and fulfillment. Years passed, and I found myself happier and more fulfilled than I had ever been. Scott and Lauren were distant memories, reminders of lessons learned but no longer sources of pain. Their lives, on the other hand, continued to be marked by the consequences of their actions. Scott drifted from one low-paying job to another, never recovering his career, while Lauren remained trapped in a cycle of financial struggle, burdened by her new partner's debts. In the end, I realized that true happiness comes from living with integrity and kindness. Betrayal and deceit bring only temporary satisfaction, followed by long-term suffering. By choosing to live my life with honesty and compassion, I found the peace and happiness I had been seeking all along. And as I looked toward the future, I knew I was finally free to build a life on my own terms, without the weight of betrayal holding me back.